In a video shot by the White House and released on Twitter last night, President Trump finally condemned the attack on the U.S. Capitol. The president said he was outraged by the violence caused by a crowd of his own supporters as Congress counted the Electoral College votes. He also finally acknowledged that a new administration will be inaugurated on the 20th, but he stopped short of actually conceding or even mentioning President-elect Joe Biden by name. Ben Tracy has more.
Demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defiled the seat of American democracy.
In a video produced by the White House, President Trump last night finally condemned the violence carried out in his name.
You do not represent our country.
But this is what the president said the day before.
We love you. You're very special.
And what he said at his rally before the assault on the Capitol may be investigated by U.S. attorneys for leading to the violence.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
The president is also now falsely claiming he immediately deployed the National Guard to stop the attack on the Capitol. He did not. The violence went on for hours, and the Guard only arrived after Vice President Mike Pence got involved. Mr. Pence, who the president is attacking for not trying to change the election result, did not come to the White House Thursday. CBS News has learned the two men are barely speaking to each other. At least 7 White House officials have now resigned in protest, plus 2 members of the cabinet, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos and Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao. She is married to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And former Attorney General Bill Barr, who left the administration just last month, delivered a blistering rebuke, saying in a statement that orchestrating a mob to pressure Congress is inexcusable and calling the president's conduct a betrayal of his office.
A new administration will be inaugurated on January 20th.
President Trump appears to finally be resigned to the fact, after 2 months, that President-elect Biden will be sworn in after misleading his supporters about false allegations that the election was stolen.
My focus now turns to ensuring a smooth, orderly, and seamless transition of power.
And Ben Tracy is joining us now from the White House. Ben, let's start with that video. Even in that video, the president, again, offered more misinformation regarding the National Guard and saying that he wanted the National Guard to be deployed to prevent the insurrectionists, as George W. Bush called them, from overrunning the Capitol. So even as he's acknowledging this orderly transition, even as he is acknowledging that there will be an inauguration of the next administration on January 20th, the president doesn't actually concede that he lost the election, and he continues to offer more falsities to the American people.
Yeah, that's true. There's no formal concession there, but I think this is probably the best we're going to get. It's been 61 days since Joe Biden was declared the winner of the election, and this is the closest President Trump has come to really acknowledging the reality of that. He doesn't use Biden's name. He doesn't congratulate him, some of the hallmarks of previous transitions. But it's the first time we have heard the president say out loud that there will be a new administration on January 20th. He has, in recent weeks, kind of slipped at times, saying the next administration, and then he corrects himself by saying whoever that may be. He didn't do that this time. This was obviously scripted. He was reading this off a teleprompter. So there is an acknowledgement here, and I think we should acknowledge that this is different from what he has done in the past, even if it is not conventional by presidential standards.
Can we talk about the resignations from top members of the Trump administration? Education Secretary Betsy DeVos and Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, of course, married to Senator Mitch McConnell. I don't. It's hard to tell how significant these resignations are. There's only a couple weeks left in this administration anyway, and I know that both women have cited, what happened on Wednesday. But, the president's, we talked before, a lot of what we heard from the president before the mob overran the Capitol building, it's very similar to what he's been saying for quite some time now.
Yeah, so a couple of things here. I think the resignations, it's always significant when a member of the cabinet resigns in protest, and now we've seen 2 people do that within 24 hours. So that is significant. You do mention that there are only 12 days left of this administration, so in some ways this is more symbolic than it really is some protest against President Trump. But DeVos, you know, in her resignation letter, she very specifically points the finger at President Trump, saying that his rhetoric is what led to this and that that's a real inflection point for her. So these weren't simply resignation letters that said, you know, it's been a pleasure to serve the administration, but I'm resigning. They did explain why they were resigning and that it was this event that took place that they believe the president had a role in that led to those resignations. I think what's probably the most significant thing about this is with these 2 resignations, the idea that the 25th Amendment could be invoked becomes much more remote. You basically have 2 people who likely would have been votes for that, given their positions and given that this led them to resign. You need a majority of the cabinet to vote with the vice president to invoke that 25th Amendment to remove the president from office. With these 2 people gone, that becomes less likely.
Yeah, and Ben, I know that you've talked about this in the past, including the fact that the Vice President of the United States and the President are barely speaking to each other now. You just mentioned that the Vice President is facing some mounting pressure to invoke the 25th Amendment. With regards to these resignations, it is significant that 2 members of the President's cabinet would resign, but let's not forget that Elaine Chao stood by President Trump in the lobby of Trump Tower when the President made those comments about Charlottesville. Had nothing to say back then. I wonder if it's, Ben, if you're hearing that perhaps why we are seeing some of these resignations, why we're seeing some of these folks finally deciding this is the last straw, is because they don't want to be in the position of having to invoke the 25th Amendment. It's a way to separate themselves from this president in the waning days of the presidency without really having to have any skin in the game going forward.
Yeah, and they know that reporters are constantly calling the offices of these cabinet secretaries, asking what their position is on that. Mm-hmm. This is a nice way of not having to take a position on it. And it's also, I think we have to acknowledge that this is reputation management. These are people who want to do other things in life and now don't want to be so closely associated or tarred by this real stain in the last moments of the Trump presidency, even though these 2 cabinet secretaries in particular are people that have been a part of this administration from the very beginning. We haven't mentioned this, but we should mention the other significant thing is that Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation, is married to the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and we know that Mitch McConnell very much started to distance himself from the president the other day at the Capitol. So this also represents the further breaking of the president from the leaders of his own party.
Yeah, and there are certainly some reports out there about just how angry Mitch McConnell was on Wednesday about how, things unfolded. Of course, he was in the Capitol building, ushered off with all the other lawmakers. A Wall Street Journal headline, just sort of before all the violence erupted, described the president as in a dark place, spending most of his day isolated and angry. Since that, we've learned that he really hasn't spoken to the vice president very much. Obviously, one of his favorite outlets, Twitter and Facebook. Facebook suspended him now indefinitely. Twitter suspended him for a period of time. Do we know what it's like behind the scenes now at the White House?
We know the president is very isolated here at the White House, more so than ever before. When you're president, you have a lot of things on your plate, and people are constantly coming in and out of the office based on their areas of expertise. The president is dealing with very little now, except for this: his focus on the election, his focus on grievance, and now his response to what happened at the Capitol. So we have learned that he is very isolated inside. Our colleague Major Garrett has said that the president is basically now just talking to these outside advisors, these people like Rudy Giuliani, like Michael Flynn, that share his mindset about what happened with the election, that he's not so much talking to his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, or the White House counsel, Pat Cipollone. And one White House advisor told Major it's just the 4th ring of crazy that he's talking to right now, and that's the craziest ring. But clearly there are still people getting through to him, because for the president to stand up there in front of the camera, in front of that teleprompter, and say what he said yesterday, which is the exact opposite of what he said 24 hours before, obviously somebody convinced him, you need to do this to have some sense of trying to save some part of your reputation or your presidency in these final 12 days.
And finally, Ben, just if you could dig in a little bit more into what you're learning about the president's relationship with the vice president. You say that the two have barely spoken. There are some reports out there that the president we already know how the president wanted Mike Pence to behave during the counting and the certification of the electoral ballots. So he followed his constitutional responsibility and his duties, and he didn't do what the president wanted him to do. But there's also some reporting out there that Mike Pence is surprised that the president didn't do more to quell the violence, that he's surprised that the president, let's not forget, Mike Pence, Ben, as you know, was in the chamber when those insurrectionists overran the Capitol, and he was in harm's way. I mean, the vice president of the United States was in harm's way and was spirited away, presumably by Secret Service agents. And I guess there's some reporting out there that the vice president is surprised that President Trump hasn't reached out to him or his family. But the question I have is, you've worked with this guy for 4 years. Why are you surprised?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was told by someone close to Mike Pence yesterday, late afternoon, that the two of them, the president and the vice president, had not spoken since before the president's rally on Wednesday. So the significance of that is that means that while, as you say, the vice president was there in the Senate as all this was going down, the president did not reach out to check on how he was doing. He did not reach out afterwards to check on how he's doing. I don't know if they have spoken since yesterday afternoon. It seems unlikely. The vice president did not come here to the White House yesterday. There is so far no sign of him here today. But as you mentioned, this isn't just about what happened at the Capitol. Their relationship completely dissolved in real time right before this, as the president basically set his vice president up as the fall guy for not being able to overturn this election. The president publicly and directly asked the vice president to do something he could not do. And the president told his supporters, if Mike Pence does this, we'll win. If he doesn't do this, we'll lose. And then he tweeted out afterwards saying that the vice president lacked the courage to do it, never mentioning that this is something the vice president couldn't do even if he had wanted to do it, which there's no sign that he wanted to do that. I think he's aware of his constitutional duty. So this appears to be a relationship that is very frayed, and that's probably a generous term at this point.
I think so. In other words, the president lied to his supporters about what Mike Pence could do and could not do. Ben Tracy, thank you very much.
Thank you.